welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to break down an important topic for Canadians traveling back and forth to the United States. So even though Canadian citizens don't usually need a visa for short trips to the United States, U.S. immigration law still does apply. You're coming into a foreign country. Canada and the United States have a border. They're not the same. I think you're fully aware of that. And there are rules and responsibilities that I think Canadians and Americans going to Canada take for granted because of the ease of coming into the United States or visiting Canada and going back and forth. So in this video, we're going to cover the admission rules, how long you can stay in the United States under U.S. immigration law, the I-94 admission record that we've talked about a lot before, your passport requirements, and what happens if you're refused entry into the United States. So first, do Canadians need a visa to enter the United States? So for most short-term visits to the United States, it's a simple no. Canadians are what are called visa exempt, and they typically do not need a visa for business or tourism to the United States. And when I'm talking business, it's not working, it's to conduct business, attend seminars, meetings, trade shows, things of that nature, where a visa is not required, a work visa for that matter. But there are some exceptions to this visa rule. So Canadians typically do not require a visa stamp in their passport unless they're getting an E1 or an E2 visa, a K visa, which is a fiancé visa, diplomatic visas, as well as immigrant visas. And that's when you're seeking entry to the United States to live here permanently. In those cases, you will get an actual visa stamp in your passport, and it is required for you in those situations to come to the United States. Everyone else, aside from an ESTA traveler from other countries, must have a visa to enter the United States. So Canadians are privileged in this respect, but not exempt from all visa rules, even though they may not get a visa in their passport. So how are Canadians entered into the United States or admitted into the United States under B1, B2 status? In other words, as a visitor to the United States. So when entering the United States as a visitor, Canadians are usually admitted under B1, B2 status. You may not be aware of that, but that's what it is when you're coming in for business or tourism. B1 for business, B2 for tourism. And most people assume that this automatically means you're admitted for a 6-month stay to the United States. Now, although that is a lot of the times true, it's not always true. CBP has the discretion to admit you into the United States for whatever term they deem appropriate for that visit to the United States. And so it's completely at the direct discretion of CBP. They can admit you for up to 6 months per visit, but they could also limit your stay to a day or a week at the discretion of the CBP officer. So if you're coming to the United States and you say you're coming for a weekend wedding or a one-day meeting, they may only admit you for the time frame that you specifically specified. However, in most instances, as a Canadian, you're probably fully aware, if you show up and you say that you're just coming for the day, they're not going to go through the hassle most of the time to limit your stay, to a day or a week. They'll admit you as a non-controlled Canadian most of the time. So there are re-entry and time limit rules when you are coming back and forth to the United States. So if you leave the US and return before your original 6-month period expires, CBP officer has 2 options. They can admit you for the time remaining on your previous stay. That's assuming that you were just admitted for 6 months, or they can give you a brand new 6-month time period. So what you get depends entirely on the officer's discretion. They will determine whether or not they want to give you a full 6-month stay or limit that next stay for a certain duration. Now, the I-94 record is your most important document for your stay. The CBP will rarely put an I-94 or a stamp in a Canadian's passport anymore. To retrieve that, you have to go to the I-94 CBP website and download this I-94 using your passport biographic page. That I-94 record is going to determine how long the CBP officer admitted you to the US and the status that they admitted you in. So Do not rely on your passport or even a visa stamp in your passport, or even if you had a USCIS approval notice you're entering on. Those are admission documents to the United States. None of those control your authorized period of stay. Only that I-94 record controls your stay in the United States and determines how long you're authorized to be here and what you're authorized to do when you're here. Keep in mind that CBP won't admit you beyond the expiration date of your passport either. So let's say you're applying for a TN and you're applying for a three-year TN, but your passport's only valid for 2 years. They will admit they can approve you for the entire 3-year time period, but they cannot admit you with your I-94 stamp or record into beyond 2 years. So that means after the 2 years, once you get a new passport, you return to a port of entry, then they would admit you for the remaining 1-year time period. So they could only admit you to the expiration date of your passport. Now, there is a myth out there about Canadians only getting up to 6 months per year in the United States. So although there is a 6-month limit per stay, that does not mean a Canadian can't come for more than 6 months per year. That does not limit their entries throughout the entire year. And if you want to get technical, there is no annual limit. But Canadians must maintain their ties to Canada and prove that they have not abandoned their ties to Canada and that they're not residing permanently in the United States. So they use this 6-month rule to determine, as part of their test, to determine where are you laying your head, where are you spending most of your time, where are you working, are you still a permanent resident of Canada, or are you now, does the balance come to the United States? So if you're spending more time in the US than Canada, CBP may ask how you're supporting yourself, and whether you're essentially trying to live in the United States without proper status. So each entry is treated separately, and they're going to look at your habits. They're going to look at they could look at your ties, your work, whether you're going to school, and all of these things to determine whether or not your balance is shifted to the United States or Canada. Registration requirements, and this is another big topic, the USCIS registration requirements. Most Canadian citizens are issued an I-94 when they enter the United States, and that's done electronically again, and that's why it's important to check your passport. And if you're issued this I-94, you are exempt from those registration requirements. And most Canadians flying into the United States always receive that I-94, so they automatically meet that registration requirement, and they don't need to worry about that. If somebody is turning 14 while in the United States, they must register within 30 days of their birthday. So any foreign national who's turning 14 while in the United States, no matter what their stay, must register within those 30 days using the G325R registration. And parents or guardians, you are responsible for completing this if your child will be staying in the United States for 30 days or more. Now, if you enter by land or sea and are not issued an I-94, but plan to stay longer than 30 days, you must register, or the better option is request an I-94 pre-entry to the United States, and you can do that through CBP's website. You can register your entry within a week of your visit to the United States and pre-register, meet that requirement, and then you don't have to worry about after your entry to the United States. And so what happens if you are refused entry to the United States? And this is important to understand. So if you're applying for admission at a Canadian border crossing or at a pre-flight inspection point in a Canadian airport, and CBP refuses your entry to the United States, you're generally just sent back to Canada. You're typically not denied unless you have a criminal violation or a serious immigration violation that would that would allow them to detain you. Pre-flight inspection locations in Canada do not issue expedited removal orders. They simply turn you away and send you back to Canada. But if you're applying from a third country, that's where you could face possible detention. For example, if you're applying from Mexico, and both US and Mexico decline to admit you, they say that you're not admissible to the US or Mexico, CBP may detain you until you can be returned to Canada. So you're always better off applying at a Canadian port of entry if you're Canadian, not applying at a port of entry from another country. Now, Canadian citizens traveling to the United States should keep a few things in mind. Entry is always at the discretion of the CBP officer. Your I-94 controls your stay, not your passport or your visa stamp. You're not limited to 6 months a year, but your length of stay does raise questions about your ties. Some travelers must register with USCIS, and this depends on your entry method and your length of stay in the United States. Refusals work differently depending on where you apply from, whether it's from Canada or from a third country. So make sure you understand these rules when you're traveling to the United States to avoid any border issues. Hopefully you found this video helpful and it cleared up some questions that a lot of Canadians have about visiting to the United States. If you haven't already, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this videos with others who would find this content helpful. And follow us for more immigration tips for Canadians.